Hello and welcome. I'm pleased to say we're back again for a second episode to talk to you more about CBX, constraint-based execution. This one has been a long time in the making as we're all busy as ever serving our current customers and building relationships with some exciting potential new ones too. Thank you all for tuning into episode one. And if you haven't seen it, please do go and check it out. What we're going to cover in today's episode will make a lot more sense if you've seen it. We were astounded with the response we got to our first episode. There is evidently real appetite out there for improving complex manufacturing systems. And with that, let's welcome back again to Tim and Richard, our subject matter experts on all things constraint-based execution. Good afternoon, guys. How are you both?
Hey,
Doing
good
well.
afternoon, Ben. Doing well, thank you.
Excellent, excellent. So, Tim, we're going to talk to you first, if we may, and we'll get started in some of the details around CBX. So, last time in episode one, we covered from a very high level what it's all about, what it's for, what its purpose is. And today, we want to dig a little more into the mechanics of kind of how it works and what happens. So, can you start to walk us through that?
Certainly. I can use an example of a recent client that reached out to us. It all started, they saw CVX, they saw what we offer, and they were intrigued. So they set up an initial meeting where we got to talk in a little more detail about what we do. But more importantly, we got to hear from them what their struggles are and where they say that they need help. And in this case, they had already had models, production models, but they were struggling to use them as effectively as they know they could. So what they asked us to do is come in and do some validation of the models, verify the constraints, do an analysis of what their models are compared to what our process would generate from their data. And lastly, they wanted some training with the scheduling tool that they had. And we have special knowledge in that scheduling tool, and they wanted us to come in and provide some training to their industrial engineering folks.
Awesome. So tell us a bit about that model you mentioned there. I mean, amongst our viewers, the word model means many different things to many different people. So what are we talking about specifically here?
Yeah, a model just in general is a simplified representation of something in reality. Like you can think of model cars or model rockets. For what we're doing, when I say a model, it's a digital representation of the elements that must work together to assemble a large scale end item like an airplane. This includes at a very minimum, you need the tasks required by engineering defines what those tasks are. Manufacturing engineering usually writes jobs or plans. So we need the list of those tasks. We need the sequence that those tasks must be performed in. We need the labor requirements for each of them. Some of them are going to be electrical, plumbing. There's going to be in tank if it's for an aircraft. So all that needs to be included in there. And then on top of that, we also need to use space zones because there you can only fit so many people in a flight deck. And so if you have a model and you try to schedule that and it puts 10 people in the flight deck, that's not going to be a good representation of reality. So on top of that, we also need to know a bunch of random things like can jobs go across shifts? Can they go across days? And that's usually an organizational norm that's in place at a place. We put all that together along with a whole lot of other stuff, and we use that as the basis to provide priorities, to find critical chain, and suggest improvements in the system.
Nice. That explains it very well. I mean, it's an incredible amount of information and data around the manufacturing process of building any one of these units, right? So having it all contained in one place, i.e. the model, as we talk about there, is really, like you say, the basis of everything we do with that information. So then, in summary, then we're kind of working with them to understand their processes and talk about how they go about today executing their processes and see really how we can help them improve everything they're doing there. And then, Richard, could you walk us through what actually happens then when we get this kind of engagement with a customer?
Sure. So I'll use that same engagement that Tim's talking about. So we got a bunch of data from the client, some of which included the elements that Tim talked about, and there were a couple other elements they gave us. We cleaned the data, sanitized the data, and used that to actually build that model. Then we went on site and spoke with everyone from shop floor manufacturing leads and senior engineers to the site leadership. Within them, we took that information and then combined everything together. in order to actually get an understanding of not just how the aircraft in this case wanted to go together, but how ready the factory actually was from a technological standpoint, cultural, even skill set in one case, to actually implement constraint-based execution as a management system. And all of this rolled up together into a set of final recommendations and ideas for improvement for them.
Awesome. So let me just ask about those conversations. You said we're going on site. We're talking with, I guess people on the shop floor up to site management there, as you say. What do those conversations look like? What kind of questions are we asking there?
So there's really two key questions that we start with. Well, I should say start and end with. The first is walk us through a day in your life. What does a day on the floor or in the office actually look like? Because that tends to start exposing those pain points. Right. And the second piece is, if you have a magic wand, we give you a magic wand, a single wish. What one thing are you changing? And that information then serves to inform not only the rest of our conversations, but also potentially our recommendations back to the client. And we recognize that taking anyone off the floor out of their normal day-to-day job is extremely problematic. So we try to keep these interviews as short as possible. In most cases, 15, no more than 30 minutes.
Right. Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out. Yeah, I'm sure that's something that's going to catch attention of people running factories or all over the place. Yeah. So my next question there is, okay, so essentially we're seeing how ready they are for the CBX system of management, even with the tools that they've already got potentially. And ultimately, they're not getting software. So what are they getting?
So CBX, to be clear, is not a software solution. At its heart, it's a system of management to build integrated plans and orient everyone around that's in the system around one singular priority, and to identify to the support organizations and the improvement organizations where the bottlenecks are and where that effort needs to be focused. Most companies already have software to do scheduling and dispatching and work assignment. So the goal of CBX is not to add another thing into that mix. Right. What we want to do is we want to utilize the existing software as efficiently as possible to execute this new system of management. So if we go in and when we're on site and we notice that there are gaps in software, we are experts at assessing the situation, filling the gaps as efficiently as possible with tailored solutions. But bottom line is, it's not another piece of software that has to be integrated into your digital roadmap.
Absolutely. So essentially, we're seeing what the state of process is at the moment, seeing how ready they are for adopting that CBX system of management, even with the tools that they've got at their disposal. And ultimately, then they're not getting software from us. So what are they getting?
Yeah, it depends really on what they ask for. We do have some core deliverables that Richard went over, but that initial engagement is where we can see what they care about, what are some of the things that maybe they want us to look at. And so, the core deliverables that we provide are a production system model, which includes all the attributes I mentioned before, a detailed report of the data that's provided, that's sanitized. We build SPC charts, obturations, and we identify some very obvious anomalies in the data that can be looked at. And then we take all of that detailed information and we roll that up into a summarized executive presentation that can be shown at a higher level. And then it is, as included in that executive presentation, is an analysis of what we found when we went on site, maybe some things that aren't related to a model that maybe need to be addressed in the culture or how people feel about their jobs. And then all of that is rolled up into our recommendations of other things, software maybe that needs to be optimized, or maybe some gaps in integrations.
So Tim, you mentioned the SPC charts. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, SPC charts are a great way to look at whether or not you're in compliance or you need to pay special attention to things that are outside of the control limits. So this particular example that we're looking at now is of one job, and its duration, the subtraction of its actual duration from its planned duration for each of those line numbers. If this job was in compliance and there were no issues with it, you would have dots on the bottom line of 0 for all of these line numbers, because that means you're meeting your plan. In this case, there's high variability for a few of these line numbers. In one case, above 200 hours over the plan duration. So this would be, we'll pull this for each of the worst offenders of jobs in the data set to provide some insight as to maybe some things to look at for training purposes, or maybe there's a supplier that is very inconsistent, which causes a job to be delayed, or maybe there's quality issues. Whatever that is, we highlight the worst offenders in these SPC charts because it's a really good way to understand that and identify it.
So, Richard, what about a situation where we have a customer who they don't know what they're looking for? They know they need help, but they're not sure where to start. How do we approach a situation like that?
I mean, I'd say the fact that they know they need help means they know what they want. They want to improve. So where we start with is the exact same place. We start with building them, talking to them, understanding where they're at today, building that model, and then focusing our recommendations around what are we seeing in that model, and then working with them to tailor those recommendations to their current situation.
Excellent. Thanks, Richard. And so that essentially wraps up the majority of what we wanted to cover today. And really then to summarize what we're looking at in terms of what does a good engagement look like with us on CBX? And afterwards, you should see a system where the production system is able to build the products, ultimately less time, has reduced labor costs, other potential improvements across the board as well, and ultimately increased overall productivity. And with what comes with that is, of course, reduced costs, reduced flow, and ideally increased morale and a happier workforce. So as before, if you're watching on LinkedIn, please give us a like and share with anyone who you think might be interested in what we're talking about today. Feel free to contact any of us directly to keep the conversation going. And if you have questions about CBX or anything else we've talked about, please feel free to put those into the comments. And if there's things there that we think might be appropriate to talk about in future episodes, then we'll do exactly that. Thank you very much for listening. And until next time, goodbye.